tranquility of her suburban home. But on that night, the usual peace was far from comforting. Dark clouds began to gather in the sky, heralding a fierce storm. Lightning slashed across the horizon, briefly illuminating the Victorian facade of the house, while thunder reverberated, shaking the walls. Sarah was alone. Her parents had gone to an event in the city and wouldn't return until dawn. She was using the rare solitude to study for her final exams, accompanied only by her cat, Oscar, lazily asleep on the couch. As the storm intensified, the electricity began to flicker, causing the lights to dim. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but tried to focus on the books spread across the kitchen table. She was determined not to let the storm distract her, even when the power finally gave out and the house plunged into darkness. Using a flashlight, Sarah checked the breakers in the basement. Each step echoed ominously in the silence, interrupted only by the sound of torrential rain pounding on the windows. The basement was damp and cold, filled with shadows that seemed to move as she swept the flashlight from side to side. After restoring the power, Sarah returned to the kitchen, relieved to see the lights flicker back to life. But her relief was short-lived. Oscar, who had been comfortably asleep, was now on alert, fur bristling, staring fixedly at the staircase leading upstairs. A deafening thunderclap resonated, causing Sarah to jump. "What is it, Oscar?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The cat obviously didn't respond, but his behavior unsettled her. Slowly, Sarah turned to look in the direction Oscar was staring, feeling a knot of anxiety form in her stomach. Something was amiss in that house, and the night was only just beginning. Returning to the kitchen, Sarah noticed the atmosphere had changed, as if an invisible presence was watching her from the shadows. A sense of fear began to grip her, but she forced herself to continue with her routine, trying to ignore the growing feeling that she wasn't truly alone. Thus began Sarah's longest night, marked by a storm that seemed to bring something far more sinister than mere thunder and lightning. The storm roared outside, its gusts of wind rocking the windows of the old house where Sarah was alone. The electricity had already flickered a few times, making the lights dim and increasing her discomfort. Sarah tried to focus on the book she was reading, but her attention constantly drifted to the sounds around her. It was then that she heard it for the first time, soft, measured footsteps coming from upstairs. She looked up, heart racing, trying to listen more closely. Maybe it was just the old house settling in the storm. She decided to ignore it, but the footsteps continued, moving back and forth. Sarah's unease grew. She tried to rationalize the noises, thinking it might be just her imagination, heightened by the isolation and the incessant sound of the storm. However, the sensation of being watched began to intensify. Later that night, when she went to the kitchen for a glass of water, she noticed something strange. The flower vase that had been on the center of the table was now on the floor, with dirt spilled around. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, trying to remember if she had moved the vase herself. She decided she must have knocked it over earlier and cleaned up the mess, but doubt lingered. When she returned to the living room, she saw something that made her heart race. On the wall mirror, there were small handprints, dirty with soil, that hadn't been there before. The air suddenly turned cold, and Sarah felt a shiver down her spine. She was beginning to realize she might not be as alone as she thought. Whispers began that same night. At first, they were soft and indistinct, as if someone were murmuring upstairs. Sarah tried to ignore them, burying her head under the pillow, but the whispers grew louder, almost forming words. She got out of bed, trying to follow the sound, but it seemed to move, coming from all sides. Sarah's tension increased. She began to question the house history, wondering if there was something more sinister than mere old age. The lights flickered again, and she felt an intense chill, as if an invisible presence was there, watching her, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. While the storm raged outside, Sarah tried to stay calm inside the house. However, something was wrong. As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, she noticed something disturbing: dirty handprints on the walls. They looked fresh, as if someone had passed through not long ago. Her heart raced. Sarah racked her memory, trying to recall if she had noticed these marks before, but she couldn't. With a lump in her throat, she tried to wipe the marks off with a cloth, but they seemed to seep into the wall, refusing to disappear. This was the first clear sign that something sinister was lurking. As the night wore on, the feeling of being watched grew more intense. With every step she took, she felt invisible eyes following her every move. She tried to ignore it, but the presence became more palpable. The electricity flickered again, and the lights blinked intermittently. That's when she felt a chill down her neck, as if someone were right behind her, breathing slowly. Determined to confront her fear, Sarah searched for the amulet her grandmother had given her, a silver necklace that always comforted her. But when she opened the drawer where she kept it, it wasn't there. In its place, she found an old photograph of an unknown child with a sad and disturbing gaze. The necklace, which never left her room, was now in the attic. With each strange event, the presence in the house became clearer and more frightening. The tension was almost unbearable, and Sarah knew she needed to figure out what was happening before it was too late. The presence wasn't just a feeling, it was real, and it was becoming bolder by the minute. Sarah's panic escalated when all her efforts to get help failed. When she tried to call the police, the line was completely dead, as if the storm had cut off all communications with the outside world. She stood frozen for a moment, holding the phone with trembling hands, feeling the chilling cold that seemed to emanate from the house walls. Determined not to succumb to terror, Sarah began to explore the house, searching for something that could explain the bizarre events. It was then, moving an old rug in the second-floor hallway, that she discovered a small locked door, almost imperceptible. Sarah had never noticed that door before. Driven by curiosity and the need for answers, she searched for a way to open it. After frantic searching, she found an old key hidden in a kitchen drawer. With the key in hand, she returned to the hallway and unlocked the door, revealing a dusty, dark room. The air inside the room was heavy, almost suffocating. In the center of the room was a circle drawn on the floor with symbols she didn't recognize, surrounded by extinguished candles. Examining the room, Sarah found an old diary, its pages yellowed with age. Flipping through the diary, she discovered it belonged to the former owner of the house, who seemed obsessed with occult rituals. The last pages detailed a ritual to communicate with spirits, and a sense of absolute horror gripped her when she realized the ritual had been performed right there, in the room she had just discovered. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the only candle illuminating the space. Sarah felt a threatening presence behind her, and as she turned, she saw a nebulous, indistinct figure with glowing eyes fixed on her. The figure advanced, and Sarah was violently thrown against the wall, feeling an invisible force holding her in place. Fighting against fear and pain, Sarah remembered something she had read in the diary about banishing spirits. She began reciting the verses she could remember, her voice trembling but determined. The figure hesitated, seeming to weaken with each word she spoke. With one last effort, Sarah shouted the final words of the incantation, and the figure disappeared with a deafening scream. Exhausted and trembling, Sarah staggered out of the room and locked the door behind her. She knew she had faced something beyond comprehension, but she also knew she had survived the most terrifying night of her life. She ran out of the house, vowing never to return, leaving behind only the echo of her own screams and the feeling that somehow she had managed to appease the spirits residing there. The tension in the house reached its peak when Sarah, desperate, finally found the courage to confront the sinister presence. Armed with a candle and an old Bible found in the attic, she slowly descended into the basement where the noises were most intense. Entering the basement, she found an improvised altar covered with ancient symbols and remnants of burnt candles. In the center was a dusty diary dated over a century ago. Sarah began to read, discovering that the house had been the setting for occult rituals performed by its early inhabitants, who sought power through human sacrifice. As she finished reading the last page, a cutting cold filled the air, and the malevolent presence became visible. The figure of a spectral woman, with empty eyes filled with hatred, advanced towards Sarah. Fighting against fear, Sarah remembered the diary's words. The evil spirit was trapped there by an unfinished ritual. Determined to complete the ritual and banish the spirit, Sarah began reciting the words she found in the diary, mixed with prayers. The entity fought against her voice, trying to silence her with terrible visions and physical pain. With tears in her eyes and almost no strength left, Sarah persevered, completing the ritual at the last second. There was a flash of intense light, and the spirit let out a scream of anguish before disappearing. The house shook, and a sense of peace began to fill the air. Exhausted and wounded, Sarah passed out. She woke up hours later, still in the basement, but the atmosphere in the house had completely changed. The oppressive feeling and the noises were gone. When Sarah climbed back upstairs, she found Jack, who had returned and was panicked not to find her. She told him everything that had happened, and together they decided it was time to leave the house forever. As they packed their things, Sarah made one last visit to the basement. In a final gesture of respect and release, she burned the diary and dismantled the altar. They left the house, taking only the lessons learned and the promise to never underestimate the forces of the unknown. The story ends with Sarah and Max in a new home, trying to rebuild their lives. And although they never spoke of the events of that night again, they both knew they had survived something truly terrifying. The old mansion, now silent, remained empty, but the legend of what had happened there would continue to haunt the memories of the few who dared to know it.